All right, we've got a ton of stuff to talk about today. Mostly, why this transition's happening, how it's happening, where we are in the roadmap, and then where we're going from here. And each of you has a very different perspective, and there's so much work that's being done here. I really want to make sure people know what that's looked like from the perspective of the people actually building it, and then really how people can interact, when they can interact, and what that'll look like going forward. But to start out, I obviously know you all very well. I feel lucky to work with you just about every day. But let's open it up with some introductions, because everyone watching and here might not know exactly who you are, so go over your backgrounds, how you got here, and then give an overview of what you're doing at Edge and Node. And we can start closest to me and go down the line.
Hello. Oh, does it work? Hi, my name is Simon. I joined the space in 2017. I was building the front end for the protocol. Back in the days, it was called Melonport. It's now the Enzyme protocol. And doing that, we really wanted to be fully decentralized. Like 2017, that was already a big thing. And it is an asset management on-chain protocol. So like for me as a front end and the user experience focus, we needed to have charts, right? Like how did these vaults develop and the token price and so on and so forth. So, but that was not possible to do fully decentralized, or like it was very crazy. And then we discovered the graph and started to integrate with the graph very early on. And then later in my journey in Web3, I joined Edge and Node to work on the graph and this amazing technology. And now I'm doing developer relations. And what I also did, fun fact, when we started to migrate projects to the decentralized network, we did a white gloving. So like all these projects, we reached out and said like, hey, we do everything for you, and then we just hand over the endpoint, and I did roughly maybe 20 of these. So I have a lot of experience of actually migrating to the decentralized graph network. Yeah.
All right, hi, it's good to be here. So I'm Pablo. I started in Edge and Node as a member of the smart contracts team last year, and been working on this Arbitrum transition, the contracts for that. And then lately I've started transitioning to more of a protocol product manager role. So working more closely with BK and trying to help coordinate all of the effort that's going on into making the transfer tools happen.
Hi, I'm BK, or Brandon Kramer. I originally was kind of like headed on this path in academia, and went to a postdoc at the University of Virginia. And there I was kind of working with the NSF to scrape a bunch of open source data from GitHub. And in the process, got more involved in open source and Web3, and realized the graph is, whoa, the impact of this, and kind of thought, this might be where I'm headed anyways if I were to pursue that academic venture and kind of look for on-chain, open access, public data. So I made the transition to Edge Node in January of 2021, at first as a UX researcher, and then after about a year I switched over to the PM side, and I've been mostly working on kind of like pricing and payments and things in that realm since. And we'll probably talk a little bit about subscriptions a little bit later today, which is kind of the main focus of the past 6 months or so.
Awesome. Let's get into some of the meat of the discussion. But let's start at the top, and then we'll drill down on some various topics. Simone, I want to start with you because I'd say you probably have the most comprehensive experience of subgraphs and what people experience with it. And I mean, you've been building subgraphs for 3 or 4 years probably, and then that was at Melonport Enzyme, and now working, doing everything from high-level tech support, dev experience, and now kind of leading DevRel for the ecosystem. From your point of view, this first one's a softball, the second one might not. Why is the graph moving to layer 2 technology? But then, what are some of the pros and cons of moving to layer 2, and what do you think people experience in that realm?
Yeah, so one thing actually that's very convenient already, and it's already shipped, is when the billing moved to Arbitrum, actually. So first, billing was on Polygon, and the process was to load the billing balance to bridge GRT over to Polygon and then fill the billing balance there. And it always took some time until the bridge was finished and stuff. And actually, I think it's some months already that we can now on Ethereum mainnet directly fill the billing balance on Arbitrum. So it's actually pretty magically, I think, that we can just say like, hey, here's some GRT, I have it on mainnet, and I want to top up my billing balance on Arbitrum, and then we just send it to this contract, and thanks to this custom implementation of the Arbitrum bridge, the billing balance is automatically filled. It's pretty cool. There is also a video about this from Marcus that we can watch online and see how this goes. Yeah, and generally, I mean, working with decentralized technologies, it's always a little bit, how to say, there are more steps involved, like because we need to sign transactions and bridge stuff over. But I would say overall, like using an L2 makes it, as Arbitrum, this is a great integration with Ethereum layer 1, makes it actually much easier.
Nice. And BK, what about you from your perspective as a PM on kind of the UI product side? And then really concentrating on, we work a lot on concentrating on data consumers, subgraph developers, all participants have really great experience. What are your thoughts? Maybe different or the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the biggest lure of moving to Arbitrum is just the advantage of cost. Like, I mean, it's just so much more cost effective for all the participants. I mean, kind of thinking across the board, it doesn't matter if you're a developer that's looking to publish and upgrade on a regular basis, or if you're an indexer allocating. All of these things become cheaper, and I think the measure like 23 or 25x or something cheaper. Obviously, that's a huge advantage for not only that group, but I also think it's much more accessible for those kind of new users to the ecosystem. I know when I first was getting involved, wanting to delegate, the cost of transactions was often so high that it creates an obstacle to be able to delegate it initially. So I think it'll add advantage to get involved in that way, and there are obvious advantages for others in the ecosystem as well.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that before people still obviously on Ethereum are paying, $5 per transaction on a regular day, and there's a few different transactions. So now getting from, let's say, migrating from the hosted service to the network, as opposed to 30, 40, 50 bucks, it can be $1, $2, $3, which is really cool to see. What about you from the smart contract side?
Yeah, so obviously I think these things are also really important. But for me, coming from the smart contract side, what I find very exciting is that now that we're on L2, it kind of opens up the solution space for what you can do with the contracts and what you can do with the protocol mechanisms. Obviously, we are always going to want to be mindful of gas, but once you have very cheap transactions, you can start like expanding the kind of solutions that you can think of for things like the protocol economic mechanisms and the things that participants actually do on the network.
Nice. And what about the process of choosing Arbitrum in the first place? Right? Many people ask the question, and there are many amazing chains out there with really cool technology. So I know it was a community decision, and it was partly technical when the ecosystem looked at it at the time, but maybe BK and Pablo, you were in a lot of these discussions on the research and technical side, and BK, maybe we start with you on just a high level.
Sure, yeah, so at a high level, there were a number of advantages of using Arbitrum as the L2 for our scaling option. The biggest things that it's battle tested, kind of tried and true, a lot of developer activity over there already, and probably the biggest advantage, especially from somebody who's thinking about pricing and payments, is a very competitive cost structure and a clear narrative about what that cost will be long term. Members of our Graph Council were also instrumental in kind of like working with Arbitrum's team in the past and scaling other protocols like LivePeer. So kind of from the social and cost side, those were a number of advantages, but there's also some technical things that I think Pablo will probably talk a little bit more in detail about. The main two, I think, were WASM support or WebAssembly support and fault proofs. And I'll maybe hand it over to Pablo to talk a little bit about that and the other advantages that he sees from the contract side.
Yeah, I mean, when we started talking about this, or at least when I joined the conversation, that was about February last year, it was, we either go for a CK rollup or an optimistic rollup, and at the time, it was clear that CK rollups were a bit further away from being production ready. And on the optimistic side, Arbitrum was the only one that had fault proofs in production and on mainnets. And I think that's clearly what ended up tipping the scale in all of the conversations and what made us kind of reach that consensus that it was the best way forward at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And changing probably gears a little bit, I'd love to hear more about what the transition to layer 2 means for all the different participants. And I think a lot of people are interested. So BK, from a protocol perspective, not even getting into participants yet, what's changing on Arbitrum versus Ethereum? And then, of course, if something's different, let's say billing or curation, what is different and then why?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, again, just to reiterate, the like payments, pricing, 25 to even potentially 300x eventually cheaper is the obvious huge advantage. I think there's also some more subtle changes. One that comes to mind is curation, as you mentioned. I think this will help increase or improve the developer experience quite a bit. Right now, the way that curation works on kind of the graph mainnet is much more about like having this bonding curve. It's kind of complex. There's some risk involved. So in moving over to Arbitrum, we've kind of in the technical side, flattened the bonding curve, and that technicality isn't that important. It is more important in terms of developer experience. It's much more straightforward, easy to understand, and as a result, I think this will kind of translate to better quality of service across the network because it's much more straightforward and easy to understand both from the developer and indexer perspective. Perhaps the thing that I'm most excited about, though, and I'm a little biased in this sense, is that we'll be moving into this kind of beta test where we're testing and introducing subscriptions on Arbitrum. So basically what that means is that any subgraph that's on Arbitrum will have access to, first in this kind of smaller group, and then eventually to everybody, will have access to setting up subscriptions on Arbitrum. What that experience looks like is you'll access billing. You basically just need to have USDC on Arbitrum and know how many queries you plan to use on a monthly basis. You'll make 3 clicks and set up your account, and then you'll have a fixed cost for your queries over the course of the month. So that basically just provides a lot more price predictability, better cost estimates for your business or any organization that's using a subgraph. But there's also a number of other kind of smaller advantages, more subtle things like being able to pay in stable coins, obviously, a number of analytics charts to understand your query usage over the course of the month, and even be able to kind of look at query limits or rate limits rather. And then a number of other things, kind of like being able to find out and understand how you use subscription keys within your dApps. So a lot of cool things coming on that. If you are interested in kind of trying out this and participating in this beta program, feel free to touch base with Simone, Kyle, or me, and we'll kind of get you involved. And yeah, love to have a wide number of users in the community test this out for us.
And you mentioned stables. What about credit card, bank account? Will it be, because what it needs to get to is SaaS level experience, Web 2 level experience. So what do you think that'll look like?
Sure, yeah. So I guess it's worth mentioning that the pay-as-you-go, or the original billing system that we have in place will still be there. Payments in GRT will be, payments in GRT will be over there. We'll have USD for subscriptions initially, and then eventually continue on with offering Banksa. Banksa and Fiat is available in the pay-as-you-go system. That will be added to subscriptions as well as GRT eventually. So we're really kind of taking steps towards that, in addition to offering a number of other upgrades like recurring payments and things like that. I know everybody's pretty excited for recurring payments, which essentially leads to this experience where you set it up, set it and forget it, and you can get back to doing the things you love to do, like building your dApp.
Yeah, and I love seeing the pricing of, it's not only stable, it's extremely competitive, probably lower than they'd be paying in the network right now by a large margin. So that's really fun to see. And Simone, can you talk about what that means for like participants, subgraph developers, data consumers, and as things sit right now, what can people do? What's the process of doing that to move over to Arbitrum and Layer 2, and what does that look like?
I think it's worth mentioning that it's already possible of today, actually, like a good while ago, to publish a subgraph directly on Arbitrum. And I think that's also what we do right now, and also with the new White Glove project, that we can directly publish a subgraph on Arbitrum, and I would highly recommend to do that. It's actually more or less the same flow, just on Arbitrum. So we need to have ETH and GRT on Arbitrum first, but other than that, it's very similar. But what I'm actually excited about is the bonding curve that's kind of removed. So that I think then curation will start to play a little bit a bigger role right now. Like all subgraphs on Ethereum mainnet, we recommend to have like 10K GRT of self-stake in order to get indexed. but on Arbitrum, where the bonding curve is removed, I expect like there is much more curation going on, and then curation actually has this function of telling also consumers which are the high quality subgraphs, because we can just sort like which subgraphs have the highest amount of curation, and then we can go there, and it probably also moves quicker. So like the idea also of public good subgraphs that subgraph developer don't query by themselves, but just create for the community. A good example is the ERC 721 subgraph. Like these use cases might become more often seen on Arbitrum because like curation changes.
Yeah, I love that the ecosystem's iterating on things like curation, and there are even some brilliant minds in the audience right now that are thinking through what that might look like 6, 12, 18 months down the road. So it's fun to always kind of see innovation, and it's never like it's never a set it and forget it thing. So I think everything will always keep innovating. And you know, Pablo, you're going to be on the hot seat right now. I saved you for last because it's just a slightly longer discussion, and I'm going to be grilling you for a bit. And this naturally flows into what you're all doing with layer 2 transfer tools, right, to make it smoother to move over. And that's a really important topic, so I want to dive in. Can you start by explaining just layer 2 transfer tools in general and just at a high level and what you're trying to achieve with them?
Yeah, so when you look at the protocol on mainnet, right now you have indexers that have to stake there, and then delegators as well. And you also have the subgraphs that are deployed through a contract on mainnet, and all of the curation happening there. So all of that is kind of state and GRT that is locked up in contracts, that you need to pay these like protocol taxes, that is you pay some GRT to do some of these actions. And if you wanted to move all of that to L2 and do it without any help, that means going through thawing periods and then paying for those taxes again and so on. So what we wanted to do is to make it much easier and having a more direct way to transfer the stake, all of the state and the GRT from mainnet to Arbitrum using the bridge and making it in maybe 1 or 2 transactions, so that, yeah, you don't need to have these waiting periods and so on. And
like to dive in a little bit deeper there, where is that build-out process in the roadmap, and then kind of what's it look like coming forward? And obviously I don't want to rug your workshop at the end, so I'd love to hear what you can share high level.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into more detail later, but right now, I mean, this has been developed for quite a while, and there's a lot of work from several teams, design, product engineering, and getting, so we have the contracts almost ready, doing the last tests, it's been audited and so on, and all of the other work, getting the product ready, is, I'd say, maybe 60–70% done. There's still a few things to do, and all of the testing and making sure it's ready. And as well, there are changes to the indexer stack that come together with this for indexers to seamlessly support the subgraphs that move from one network to the other. So I think all of this is coming together very soon. But yeah, we're not quite there, but getting there.
Yeah, I think, and I know you'll do a demo, I think it's worth talking through each participant. So let's start with kind of subgraphs. What are the subgraph transfer, what does that process look like? How does it work? Or how do you imagine it working when it's actually in GA?
Yes, so you have your subgraph in Studio. It's published, I mean, it's deployed and also published to Ethereum mainnets. And so you log into Studio, you see your subgraph, it says you can transfer it to Arbitrum. And then you have to click, you have to choose who's going to own that subgraph on L2, because you might own it with a multisig that doesn't exist in L2. There's like this kind of little details about the cross-layer communication. And then you just trigger a transaction, and behind the scenes, that's going to go through the Arbitrum bridge, and it's going to send that L1 to L2 message. And then when it gets to the other side, you just have to confirm and finish publishing that subgraph with a second transaction, this time in L2. So throughout all of that time, I mean, you've done these 2 transactions, maybe it's a few clicks maybe, and behind the scenes, we're going to have indexers that are going to detect that the subgraph migrated and therefore start showing that they're indexing it on L2 because they're already like working on both layers. Yeah, at some point you update your query URL to the new Arbitrum URL.
Yeah. So it's only for published subgraphs, they initiate in Subgraph Studio. The bridge, let's say it takes 20 minutes maybe, 20, 30 minutes, and then they still have to republish on Arbitrum after that transition takes place, correct?
Yes, that's part of making it very safe to transfer was keeping that L1 to L2 message very simple, and that's what leads to needing to do that second, that publishing on L2 side.
And then all upgrading, versioning happens on Arbitrum. They just select the Arbitrum versus Ethereum in the UI.
Yeah, from then onwards, you have, like on Studio, you'll have your mainnet published to mainnet. Also, it's published to Arbitrum, and then you can publish new versions there as well.
Awesome. And what about the curation? Does that transfer over when a subgraph moves over? How does that work?
Good question. So when you are transferring the subgraph, you are also transferring your own signal on that subgraph as the subgraph owner.
Just your own?
Just your own, yes. And this is
so it's in the same wallet, just the same wallet?
Yeah. So you have some signal that is owned by the same owner as a subgraph. And actually, it has to be non-zero, so you could, if needed, just put one GRT there, because this goes through the Arbitrum bridge and the GRT bridge that needs to send some GRT. But part of the Web3 ethos is ownership and people making their own decisions. So all the other curators on that subgraph would have to choose then when they want to send their signal to L2 or if they want to send their signal to L2.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then what happens to the subgraph after it moves from Ethereum to Arbitrum? It's republished. Does that stay on Ethereum or does it deprecate?
Right, it's deprecated. So in order for this to be a proper transfer, and the fact that we're sending all of the signal, or we're sending the owner signal, but we're also sending all of the information about that version and everything to L2, then the L1 subgraph is going to be deprecated, but there is several things in place so that that deprecation doesn't mean that the subgraph goes down immediately. It means indexers are going to have this updated stack that allows them to keep serving it for a grace period, and then the gateway is actually going to redirect any queries that come into the L1 subgraph to the L2 subgraph, so that we can ensure there's no downtime throughout that process.
Cool. I didn't know that. What about the process for index or stake? Meaning, what are the differences there? And then if indexers kind of have to index on Arbitrum, what's the chicken and egg there for their process?
They can choose what order to do things in. So you can't claim indexing rewards until you actually start indexing. You allocate to a subgraph, you index it, you present the proof of indexing. And to do that, you need to have the stake on L2. So I think what's probably going to happen in most cases is you set up your stack, then you migrate, you transfer your stake, and then you just start indexing and start using that stack with the stake that you've transferred.
Okay. And then are there any differences in indexing on Ethereum versus Arbitrum, or is it just the same process?
It's the same process. What we're going to recommend is to use the updated indexer agent that supports both networks, because you don't have to transfer all of your stake at once. You might want to, as indexing rewards are moving from one network to the other, you're going to be sending some stake first and then progressively sending more. So using that indexer agent allows you to run that very efficiently. And then in terms of if they're similar, it's actually the same process, just cheaper.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. And last question, hopefully, what about curation and delegation? Are those going to be similar processes, or are they different?
Yeah, they're all very similar steps. In the case of curation and delegation, those participants have to wait until either the subgraph they're curating to or the indexer they're delegating to has transferred to L2. And then at that point, they'll have the option to say, okay, I want to either send my signal or delegation to L2. If for some reason you don't want to go to L2, you can just withdraw your GRT on L1.
Yep. Okay. And then BK, how does it look like? How does it look in your world? Do you have anything to add? Anything you could share that you're all incorporating into the UI side of things that you all are working on that might be separate than what Pablo said?
Sure. I guess the main thing I would reiterate is just kind of the UI will kind of walk you through this process and make it fairly easy. When you go into Subgraph Studio, if you're familiar with that process, you'll see that publish button in the top right-hand corner. Right next to that transfer to L2 will be a nice little button to help you along, and you'll kind of walk through this process. The only thing I guess I would advocate is just kind of follow that process, and during that 20-minute break, take a nice little break, watch some Airbender, eat some ice cream, something like that. Come back, and you'll be set to publish. I guess one other thing is, if you're on Arbitrum, just plug again, like looking into subscriptions, making that process just as easy as possible, and go from there.
And then Simone, from a DevRel perspective, what are you and Marcus back there, Kevin, and everyone going to be doing to, where are they going to be videos? Are they going to be documents they can read? And where should they go to get all that stuff?
Yeah, we have already, I think today or yesterday, the Arbitrum Migration FAQ is published on thegraph.com, so we can go there already. There are also videos, as I said, the billing is already created, also publishing to Arbitrum directly is created. For actually every step, there will be a video and thorough documentation that we can read through or watch. And then on top of that, obviously, we are always here. You can reach out in Discord or on Telegram, and if there are any questions, to help you through these processes. So don't be shy. We are here and happy to help.
Yeah. All right. I think we've hit a lot of meat in the discussion. I want to open it up to a couple of questions, but first, let's get on with the softer side of what you're doing, what you're excited about, right? So, what are two things? One, I want to hear what each of you is excited about, whether it's the Arbitrum Layer 2 integration or something else. What are you most excited about in the graph ecosystem? And then start thinking of what you're most excited about in the Web3 ecosystem in general. You can give them both at the same time, or we can go back and forth. Yeah, didn't know this was coming.
Do I need to start?
Yes, you may.
For the graph ecosystem, actually, I think I'm most excited about this billing the set and forget experience. I think that's one thing. Currently, people need to top up their billing balance when needed, but when we have really this thing of I pay with stables, here they are, and this is how much I'm willing to pay per month, or I estimate, and then it just rolls. That would be a big step forward. I'm really looking forward to this. In terms of Web3, I'm personally very interested in the non-financial stuff that's going on. It's actually a little bit maybe my theory, or maybe just hope personally, that we see much more of these use cases like decentralized social media, like Lens, or you probably know that I'm very much into POAPs, because I think it's such a beautiful way of interacting with blockchain technology without any financial incentivizations. It's just fun and cool. So I'm excited about these use cases, which are enabled also with technologies like Arbitrum Nova. When the transaction costs go lower, that we have much more of these use cases that are beyond finance and expensive NFTs.
Love it. Pablo?
Okay, I would echo what Simon said about
You
billing.
can't do that. You have to do
I'm
something.
going to add, don't worry. I have more things to say, but I agree those things are great, and I was going to say billing and subscriptions. In terms of what's coming next to the graph, I think now that we have substream-powered subgraphs, that's very exciting. I want to see what people start doing with that, and having more stuff built on substreams on the network. And then in terms of Web3, I also agree that non-financial applications and maybe things like governance are really, really cool. But from a technical point of view, what I would love to see, what happens with that is account abstraction, and how we start having more seamless user experiences based on not having to sign everything in the same way, or having more control about your account and your identity by using a contract instead of just an EOA.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see how that builds out and how that changes, and if it really enables people that aren't crypto native or haven't been in the space a long time to actually pop in and experience. BK, you can't use either of their answers, and I'd love to hear yours.
Those are my favorite answers. That is what I've spent the last 6 months thinking about. So, I'll kind of cheat and say, building on those things, I guess the thing that I'm most excited about in the Web3 ecosystem is seeing this kind of all play out, the real advantages of decentralization and how I think it will impact quality of service and pricing. Because the thesis that I have is really that, like, okay, if you see these, like, everything continue to decentralize at all the layers that it possibly can across the stack, we should see not only like that kind of ownership, but also quality of service and pricing continue to like increase or decrease in their respective terms. I guess maybe one thing I could plug within with our own ecosystem is providing both of those things, like a better user experience and like subscriptions and billing, without relinquishing like ownership on the behalf of users. There's some like kind of proposals, maybe one including from Pablo, that really like provides the opportunity to think about like managed subgraph experiences, where a gateway or service provider can provide this like mechanism to publish a subgraph on behalf of a user, be able to curate, upgrade, do all these awesome things without having to own the subgraph. A user can still own the subgraph and pull that at any time and go to another service provider that have that flexibility to find better quality of service, to find better pricing. And I think that's ultimately what we want. That's part of the Web3 experience, is not to be locked in or like, I don't know, held hostage by a particular company. And I think that's super cool.
Yeah, I think it's important. I do think the network will win on performance and not Web 2 style contracts. And I think that's really important to us as an ecosystem. All right, let's open it up to any questions. There's a ton of experience on here. Would love to hear what's on your minds, even if it's not what we talked about. Web3, the graph in general, anything on your mind? And I'll bring you the mic if anyone has any questions. No one gets wine tonight if they don't ask a question.
Great talk. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, great talk. Thank you so much. I'm just curious to know, Graph is, called Google of, Web3 and rightly so, but Google operates very differently, right? It just goes and crawls what it wants. It pulls the data. It chooses to index or not index, and it chooses to show you its version of truth when it wants to, right? So it's completely different, although it's the same nodes operating, index and crawl. With Web3, you have people choosing to use it so much. So I'm curious about how is the next growth phase going to happen to attract developers who want to use Graph? Like, how difficult does that look at the moment?
I think I can take that. So, I mean, the Google of blockchain analogy is a simplification that roots into the fact that both kind of index data and make it available. The graph currently is only queryable through GraphQL, which is, in my opinion, also like one of the best protocols to query for data, or like the best, but I'm a front-end developer, so I'm biased. And so that's actually where I think will also be like a lot of growth, because like before, when you want to have access to blockchain data, either you go to a centralized provider and ask for access to their, I don't know, SQL stuff, have immediately a vendor lock-in, and also you need to have SQL. But now when we have like these subgraphs published and they're like open for everybody to use, like when I talk to Web 2 developers, they can just start to get to interact with Web 3, like quickly do a dashboard with POAPs that are moving, or quickly do something about like how does it work on lengths, or like do algorithms on the posts that are posted on lengths. And that's just all enabled just by GraphQL, like a technology that they already know. They don't need to understand like Solidity, EVM, and L1s, L2s, L3s, CK stuff, like just GraphQL and you get the data.
And even above and beyond that, eventually something, what the ecosystem's thinking through, really through the Graph Foundation and Core Dev ecosystem, is something called the world of data services, that it can go into different languages. It won't just be GraphQL. And there are even businesses building on the graph, like playgrounds, that you can use Python to download data sets and do data analytics. And then imagine when SQL is enabled to onboard really Web 2 data analysts and so on. And that's just the beginning. So the graph ecosystem will likely be the place where anyone can come, any dApp can get any type of information, any language, maybe not any language, but I was just talking to Sam for Semiotic about that, about how that will look and how it's just like it being discussed in an R&D. So that one is not getting away. GraphQL is super versatile. It's probably the most like effective, like you said, but some people aren't comfortable with it. So expanding that would be really cool. And then it's thinking, again, what Sam and Semiotic, kind of the MLRL, machine learning, reinforcement learning, and eventually using maybe even a chat GPT, OpenAI style no-code solution where there's natural language. And you say, I want to understand how many ENS holders increase from this month to this month, and it just auto-codes a GraphQL query or something else and spits out information. That would be extremely cool. And what's even cooler is that as opposed to something on OpenAI, like all that's junk in, junk out. Even though it's effective, because there's a lot of information in what AI is doing right now in regular spaces, this will be based on consensus-driven information, verifiably true every single block, and that will kind of change the game of what the output will look like. And that's just right now when there's a lot of information in Web3, but imagine when people start building in Web3 in normal industries, TradFi, Web2, and so on. So it really could change the idea of digital transparency, information transparency, and just being able to trust and therefore really be trustless. So yeah, and I think it's super early days. This is like these many years out probably, if not, 5, 10 years. And they'll have to kind of rip me away from this because it's such a cool, long challenge that's kind of worth my time right now. I don't think I could be doing anything more important right now. Any other questions? Yeah.
Awesome talk, guys. Really appreciate it. So I've seen the graph take off from a DApp perspective, with DeFi use cases and other use cases. I'm curious, how are you guys thinking about it from an enterprise perspective? You're seeing more gaming teams enter the space, more brands and others. I know you guys touched on this a bit with subscriptions, but yeah, how are you guys thinking about it from an enterprise perspective?
Maybe I take that?
You take it, yeah.
I'd say that what the graph is tackling right now is public data. And that's extremely important to us, in not just to the ecosystem in general. We want Web3 values to be true, and some companies want siloed information, right? They want private blockchains, and that's okay too. Some will want that. But that's probably not what we're going to tackle. This is a big enough challenge, and there'll be more than enough data to be served to more than enough, even non-crypto native companies in Web2, TradFi, and so on. That's as it sits right now. It doesn't mean that won't always be the case in the future, but right now, more than enough challenge. And then it's red-pilling the world, I'd say, and enabling people to build on Web3 more easily, because the UX and DX isn't close to Web2 right now. And so without the infrastructure being there and without it feeling as good, if not better, than Web2 user experiences, not a lot of people are going to port over. And so from an enterprise perspective, that infrastructure, what we're doing here, what we're talking about right now, needs to happen, or no one will want to come over to build on Web3 unless there's these niche industries and so on. So for the next really big dApps and killer dApps to be built, the infrastructure needs to be perfect, and that will lead to enterprise. And that's kind of a non-answer because right now we have more than enough in front of us to take on things. But I will say that we are talking with brand name Web2 and TradFi people and organizations that are already building in this space. And where I used to work, Goldman, when I was there, there was 5 or 6 people on the digital assets team. There's about 60 to 70 now, just in the few years since I left, and that's just in a couple years. And every organization's doing that, but they're doing it in private. And there are very few things they make public because there's so much reputational risk for them. But they will eventually make it public, and I think they will eventually use the graph for maybe just certain circumstances, certain transactions, and certain data, which it's just going to be the more performant network. But Web 2 TradFi might always need some privacy as well, which more power to them or not. You have anything to add there?
Yeah, maybe we can say that the Messari subgraphs, so the Messari joined as a core dev team to the graph, and they are writing these high quality subgraphs that are giving an overview over different verticals in the space. So for example, like lending protocols are all under the same schema that can be queried. And we see actually a lot of enterprise data consumers that are querying these subgraphs to get information out about what's going on the blockchain. But again, as Kyle said, it's about public data that is on-chain, but there's already like a high use case. And also I think like the data validity guarantees that the graph network provides are already quite good with the indexer attestations when they send a response to a query, but they even get better with researchers that goes into verifiable queries. So when you are a Web2 enterprise company that wants to have Web3 data, it's, in my opinion, much better to query the graph and get the data from there, because there is some data guarantees than just to trust like some data provider that might deliver the correct data or not.
That's a great point. So enterprises are already using the graph in a big way. There's 1 to 2 billion queries per day across 40,000 subgraphs, and most of it's via private servers, and enterprises will do that because they want to remain private. So a lot are already doing that through Messari subgraphs and through other things, just querying the hosted servers and decentralized networks. So it's really cool to see that even if they're going to do it in a private way, which it's mostly enterprises obviously that need Web3 data, because the world isn't living on Web3 yet. And I think it's becoming more likely that much of the world will, maybe in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Hey, thank you guys. On the infrastructure side of things, I'm curious how you guys are thinking about L2 scaling. Like, essentially, like L2 software gets commoditized. How do you guys view L2 shifting to becoming like settlement layers on their own? And essentially, like, what's your guys' stance on the L3 narrative and wanting to see, essentially like execution happening on these layer 3s? And how would that interact with like infrastructure services like the graph that are currently deployed to these L2 systems? When like it seems like the long-term roadmap for L2s is becoming their own settlement layers.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I don't know if I'm qualified to answer it. I think, the risk with going to L2s and then L3s for me is fragmentation, and having good ways to kind of interact between all of these different networks is going to be very challenging. I would say the graph, in a way, behaves as a sort of L3 in itself. I've seen mentions of the graph as a sort of read-oriented rollup on top of, well, now it's going to be on top of Arbitrum, but actually on top of each chain that it is indexing in a way, because you're reading information, doing some processing on top of it, and then posting some result back into the network with the proofs of indexing. And there's some interesting conversations going on about, the graph taking its place as this sort of very weird special case of an L3. But yeah, I think I see that risk of fragmentation in general with L3s, but it's probably going to come down to how usable L2s remain when all of the transaction volume is on L2s at that point, and whether there are good ways of making all of these different layers interact between themselves.
Who might be the best person to answer that is probably in this room. I don't know if you want to. Zach, do you have any thoughts on that? Here, hold on.
I usually take my time before speaking publicly. It's really.
We'll come back to you. All right, maybe one more question, and if not, we can call it, and we'll do 10 minutes and a 10-minute break. Then we'll come back. Live peer will be on, going over what live peer is, what the roadmap is, and we go from there. Thanks, everybody.